Holy God, may your word be spoken, may your word be heard. Amen. Please be seated. I'm guessing you're seated at home. If you're not, please be seated. Through the rest of the year here in our worship, we want to invite you on a little bit of a journey, a little bit of an adventure of faith. And their journey is going to be centered around three questions. Three questions. Here in October, we're going to ask, who is God? Small question, right? Easy peasy. 3 weeks, all we need. Who is God? When we come to November, which will start on November 1st, All Saints' Day, we're going to ask, who is the church? Who are we as the church? And then when we come to December, that wonderful season of Advent, we're going to ask, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? These three questions are going to ground us in our reflections and in some of our conversations. We're going to invite folks to come together on Zoom. I know, one more Zoom gathering. I know. We know. But for a faith purpose, we're going to invite you to gather later this month and help us hear from one another how we're answering these questions in our lives and in our homes. And so our readings give us some interesting food for thought about who is God. The one that we worship, but the one that we need to worship in the right way. And we can get ourselves in deep trouble if we worship God in the wrong way. So let's focus on the golden calf story. These readings are, again, so rich. You could take any one of them and turn them over in your heart for months on end, for a lifetime, really. But we're going to stick with the golden calf today, that amazing story of the golden calf. So Moses is where? Pop quiz. It's tough to be in the sanctuary. You got to be brave to be in the sanctuary.
He's in the mountains.
He's in the mountains, right. What's he getting? What's he getting from God up in the mountains? The Ten Commandments, the reading we had last week. Moses has ascended the mountain. God has invited Moses to ascend the mountain to receive the Ten Commandments. And he's off by himself. Maybe Joshua is nearby, his right-hand man, keeping watch over him. But the people are alone with Aaron, Moses' brother, who is the priest of the people. Right? So Moses is off, and he's off for a time, and that time stretches out. It stretches out. And something happens interiorly to the people. They kind of lose their focus and their hope. Have you lost focus and hope recently? Have you lost focus and hope recently? Yeah. I had this thing that I had read, I don't know if it was months ago or just a few weeks ago, because who knows anymore about time. But I was able to find it a little bit. It was about travel. So this is kind of a first word, kind of a privileged observation. But I remember reading, and I was able to follow up, that one of the things that has made this pandemic even more difficult for people who are used to traveling is the loss of travel. And not just the actual experience that you have when you travel, which can be so fulfilling and so enlivening and help you to grow as a person. Not only is it the experience that's lost, but what's also lost is the anticipation. Because there is healthful mental unfolding when you are anticipating going on a journey. When you've planned a trip and you know you're going to some amazing place, someplace new perhaps, or someplace familiar but that renews your heart, when you know that's coming, you can get through challenging times that are between you and then. But when that's gone, the challenging times kind of stack up on us, and we lose focus, and we lose hope. The people didn't get a clear timeline about when Moses would be back. So they, there in the wilderness, are starting to lose focus and lose hope. So they turn to Aaron and they ask for Aaron to present them gods that they can worship. Because they don't know what's happening. Moses is gone. Maybe he got tripped up in the mountains. He's not coming back. So help us. Help us. We could ask if that request was righteous, or not. We could ask. We could ask that question. I think that'd be a good question to ask. Because the way the story's presented to us, it didn't have to end necessarily the way that it did. Aaron makes a move. He's like, okay, bring me gold. Bring me the gold that you have. and I'll do something with it. I find it intriguing, the way that the text presents itself. It's the patriarchal assumptions, right? Bring your wife's gold, your son's gold, your daughter's gold. So he's talking to the men, telling them, bring the gold of everybody else to me. Patriarchy, anyone? Patriarchy, anyone? Hidden assumption, right there. Worth stopping and considering, particularly when we have, this is a bonus, particularly when we have in the epistle there this remarkable side note from Paul. Tell these two women who have been workers with me in the glory of the gospel to reconcile. Paul sees these two women in Philippi, the city that he's writing to, the church in Philippi that he's writing to, as his partners in ministry, equals. Worth noting. Didn't want to let that, I'm not going to preach on it, I didn't want to let it pass by. And as a counter note to the patriarchal assumptions here in the golden calf story, especially worth noting, because this patriarchal assumption doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be. So Aaron, let's get back in the story. Aaron has some kind of thought going on, what he wants to do with this gold, right? He asks for it. He doesn't tell the people why he asks for it, but he asks for it. And he takes it and he melts it down and he makes a calf, an image of a calf. And he doesn't get a chance to tell the people what it is. Did you notice this? The people say, behold the gods who led us out of Egypt. Aaron doesn't say that. The people say that. There's space right there that's worth spending some time in. Aaron, as someone of the priestly line, I wonder if Aaron had in mind making an altar to the Lord. I wonder if that's what he had in mind, so that people can have this liturgical action to ground them again in the one that they are waiting for and hoping for. I don't know, because we don't get an insight into Aaron's interior process. But what we do get in the text is it's not Aaron who says it's the gods, it's the people. The people, without his leadership, without his spiritual guidance, the people in a place of hopelessness and lack of focus because Moses is gone, they don't know when he's coming back. They see something shiny and they say, that's our God. And they're ready to worship. And worship making sacrifices. That's why I say, I wonder if that's what Aaron had in mind. But the people got ahead of him, and rather than be the strong individual against the crowd, which takes incredible courage, I am not berating Aaron or putting him down that he doesn't do this. Rather than do that, he tries to manage the crowd so that they do the least harm. And they start to worship the golden calf and to make a party of it. And given what they'd been through, I don't blame them from a certain point of view. I don't blame that they wanted to celebrate, because boy, what they had been through and how far they had journeyed and how hard it was. And frankly, how hard it is to have a spiritual hope in a material world. There's a simple fact as a person of faith, whatever faith you are, it's really hard to have a spiritual hope in a material world, which is a good way for us to frame our experience in this life. So who is God in this story? God's the one who gets just a little bit ticked off, right? A little bit. And here again, the text, it's just so wonderful that we talk about Jewish humor because of the Bible. We talk about Jewish humor because of the Bible. So what does God say to Moses?
He's happy with them.
Your people, to Moses, your people that you brought out of Egypt, they're messing the whole thing up. Your people. Moses would have every, excuse me? And he does later on. There are other parts of the Exodus, Numbers story where he's like, these are my people. Why are you laying this on me? But he doesn't say that here. God is ready to just wipe the slate clean and start over, because these people, in God's eyes, don't get it. But Moses does something remarkable. What does he do?
He stands up to God.
He stands up to God. He says, God, don't do this thing. Don't do this thing. Think about what will happen in Egypt. They'll say, you brought them out with all that power just to knock them down on your own. It wasn't because you're a God of compassion and justice. You're just like them. That's what they would say, God, if you do this thing. Don't do this thing. Moses is a remarkable human being. Moses is able to dwell in the spiritual places even though he's a material person. Which is to say, he's human and spiritual, right? That's who we are. Note that for later, right? Who are we? Material, spiritual people trying to work it out. But in this moment, confronting the divine, Moses is able to stand up for compassion. And God does what? The text is plain. God does what? God changes his mind. God changes his mind. So, if you were to study theology and Christian thought, you would find yourself encountering the God of the philosophers and the God of the Bible. Right? These very broad categories that pop up every now and again when folks relate how people think about trying to answer this question, who is God? And the God of the philosophers, largely grounded in the Greek philosophical tradition, going back to Plato and Parmenides, and if those names are meaningful to you, great. If they're not, don't worry about it. We'll catch up later. And the idea of the God of the philosophers is that God is eternal, unchanging, perfect, the source of goodness. And so the idea that God could change God's mind if you're dwelling in the thought of the God of the philosophers is kind of absurd. It's absurd. And here's the Bible telling us plainly, Moses confronted God about God's intention, and God changed God's mind. The Bible presents us with God as someone we can be in relationship with. And the relationship that we bring to our experience of God matters. Our choices matter, our attitudes matter, what we do matters, impacts who God is, how we experience God, how others experience God. What would have happened if Moses had not stood up? What would have happened? But he did. He did. So who is God? God is the one that we are in relationship with, the divine being that we are in relationship with, and whom our petitions and our actions and our attitudes towards matter. Now, God's attitudes and values matter more. Let's be clear. God is God, and we are us. Just so we're clear. But we matter. Because God says we matter. Because God listens to us. Because God created us. Because God loves us. I wonder if all of this was just a moment of great tension and trouble that just spilled out into chaos because bad decisions were made at key moments. I wonder if that's what this golden calf story is about. I wonder if that's a little bit about the story that we're living out now. That's, chew on that one. I think there's a big difference between their story and our story right now, just to give some context. We are headed towards a date certain when something's going to happen, and we don't know what. And when that thing happens, whatever it is, will profoundly affect the world we're living in thereafter. I'm talking about the election and the outcome, obviously. Maybe not obviously. Sometimes you just got to say things. Don't be so mysterious, preacher. Just say it. So we're in this place where our hopelessness and our lack of focus has this date certain out there, which has an uncertain outcome. And that carries its own kind of tension. That's different than what the Israelites were struggling with, because they had no date certain and didn't know what was going to come. They had no idea. So we're in a moment that challenges us a little differently than the moment challenged them. But I wonder if the wisdom for us here is to find ways to relate to God that are helpful and right and not falling into idol worship. Not falling into idol worship. Because I have to tell you, for me, idolatry is one of the most effective and descriptive terms for what the larger Christian world is doing right now. And I'm talking about our conservative brothers and sisters. And I could say more, but I'm going to pause at that point. And maybe we'll come back to that in the coming weeks, because I got 2 more weeks to preach about this with you all. For us, in this moment, where can we worship God authentically, appropriately in our lives and in our homes? Do you have a sacred space in your home where you can turn to be reminded of God, to be grounded in God's presence in our world and in your life, and to have your hope lifted up? Most people don't. Some people do. Times in my life, I've had a home altar that I would go to for my regular prayer practice. I would like to have a home altar again, one that preferably could endure the interactions of 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds. I should preface that with 4-year-old and 6-year-old boys, because that matters. That's different than if it was girls. It's different. I'm sorry, it just is. Though there are girls who are different and boys who are different, yes, we acknowledge the diversity. But there's also a truth there. As the parent of a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, pray for me. Please pray for me. We're going to put out an invitation to the parish for you to put an altar in your home. Step into that little space between Aaron and the people and take sacred things. Gold is a precious sacred thing. There's nothing wrong with gold. When you turn it into an idol, that's when it's become wrong. Find sacred, precious things that you can gather into an altar space in your home and bring yourself to God through the altar. Don't make the altar what you worship. Make the altar the place that focuses your worship to go on and upward to God. Do you catch the difference? Our Orthodox brothers and sisters have a wonderful practice in theology around icons. Icons, these depictions of holy people, or of God, or various things that get depicted in an icon. And what they see as the icon is a window that takes them through the image into the divine reality that the image depicts. And it's a way to worship. Altars are that for us. Altars are that for us as liturgical people. Altars are places, they're like windows, or as our Celtic brothers and sisters like to say, thin places, where the divine, the spiritual, and the material interact a little bit. The material is not itself the focus, but the material and its relationship with the spiritual, that's the point. Where could you craft a thin place in your home where God might become more manifest to you? We're going to send out some support for you in this coming week in our email list. If you're not on our email list, we would love to have you on that. It's a great way to stay connected and communicate with the parish. And when we get to the 30th of October, which is a Friday, we're going to invite folks to come together over Zoom to share your home altar. And we'll have some spiritual conversation about how we've been connecting with God in our homes in this time. We're called to worship. We're called to be focused. We're called to be hopeful. We're called to be grounded. To be those things requires faithful practice. So let us, friends, be faithful people, worshiping at our altars with open hearts and hopeful eyes. Amen.